What is the state of the race in your eyes right now? How are you feeling?
Well, I feel like I think some of the momentum has shifted narrative-wise this week back to Trump. I think the debate did not end up going well, and my analysis with you noted was a little schizophrenic at the time. I thought some of it was, I was positive about certain things, but I was clear that it wasn't Trump's best night. The polling came back not good. Definitely Harris advanced in the polls after the debate, and I'm a little disappointed there won't be another one because I think that was kind of the worst case scenario for Trump, and it still wasn't terrible. But it does feel like now we're kind of back on good topics, and we're not screaming about eating dogs and cats. Not to say that there aren't dogs and cats being eaten. I believe there are, to be honest with you. I just don't think that that's the main issue. I think it's more, the Americans being murdered after their family members lost their jobs. Like I think that's the bigger issue. And it feels like we're back on the good stuff. We're back on, calmly getting exposed in interviews for having no economic plan, lying about manufacturing jobs. It feels like Trump is talking on effectively on tariffs. I think the UN proves how sad the Biden administration foreign policy has been, the UN meetings that have been going on. So I don't know. I feel like we're back on good topics now. So I think that's a positive, but I think it's a tight race, very tight race.
Well, a couple different topics we've touched on this week. I want to get your thoughts on.
Sure.
So 3 illegal aliens were arrested in Nantucket.
Yeah.
For raping children.
Mm-hmm.
This week. And a fourth was just arrested. He's not arrested for raping children, but he's a MS-13 gang member in Nantucket.
Yeah.
An island of 10,000 people. And I think what's fascinating about this story is it really pushes the limits of what it would take to get people to wake up and say things, because I haven't heard a peep from the people of Nantucket.
Interesting. Yeah, I do wonder that sometimes, how people are very tolerant of the bad stuff that goes on in their area. And I feel like my friend Dennis Prager says that bravery is the rarest of the good traits. And I see that play out quite a bit. And I was thinking about this in terms of, it feels like I live in a neighborhood just north of LA, as I talk about every time I'm on the show. And it's an interesting place because it's a generally liberal area, but I have a somewhat conservative enclave. But you still see around this time in an election cycle a lot of people wimping out, and still you can tell they're just going to vote for Democrats anyway, even though they know things are terrible. They know Democrats have monopoly here. We elect some conservatives in my neck of the woods, but for the most part, the state and the broader LA metropolitan area is all run by Democrats, and they're doing a terrible job, and everyone knows they're doing a terrible job, and yet they just can't bring themselves to declare, I am a Republican now, or I am voting conservative now. They can't quite do it, and there's so many people who can't quite do it, and I do find that to be one of the left's key components for them being able to win, is just that people at the very end is saying, you know what, I'm going to come up with some rationale that I need to keep voting for the people who keep screwing things up. And that is seemingly insurmountable for us as a country. So we've got to figure out a way to stop that.
You would think kids being raped would be one that would cause people to be like, hey, who's doing the raping? Well, these guys from El Salvador. What? What do you mean from El Salvador? Yeah, they're here illegally. How'd they get here? They walked across the border. They were a getaway. They walked across the border. Oh, well, let's make sure this doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Like, I think that this isn't too difficult to put together, is it?
Yeah. Well, what ends up happening is that the establishment media doesn't cover this stuff well during the, 30. Whatever it is, the 44 months where we're not in the run up to a presidential election, and then they don't cover it well, and then the 4 months right before, they don't cover it at all. They just completely ignore it. And so you have to go to a website like Breitbart, or if you listen to a show like this one, if you want to hear it, a constant refrain I have on the show. But I do feel like some stuff is breaking out more thanks to people being skeptical of the media. I did notice that I did a slate of stories, I forget which three off the top of my head, earlier in the week, back to back to back on the top of the front page of Breitbart News. They were all immigration crime related. And I think it was the one where illegal alien killing a St. Louis, Missouri police officer, an illegal alien pleading guilty to murdering someone execution style in Michigan, and a previously deported illegal alien sexually assaulting the woman in Nantucket. I think those were the three. It's ringing a bell to me now. I think I did those three in a row, and I noticed people doing the same thing elsewhere the next day, and it made me think, okay, good. So there's enough people paying attention and getting that this is a big deal. But you, for whatever reason, there's one extra little hurdle to get people to then vote differently and to understand that there's one party that is unanimous about keeping the border open, and there's one party that sadly is imperfect on it, but at least for the most part gets that an open border is causing these problems.
We talked about this clip from the president of El Salvador, and I love whenever I talk to Frances about El Salvador, because she's still, actually I haven't talked to her in a while about it, but every time I've talked about this guy, she's like, we're not really sure yet. You know what I mean? He's done some good things, but and I appreciate her hesitation. But he spoke at the UN and said, because they used to be the murder capital of the world,
sure,
and they put a bunch of people in prison, and now there's like the murderers are not murdering because they're not in places where they can murder people. Crazy, the crime rate went down. He said, we have prioritized the security of our citizens over the comfort of criminals. Some complain that we put thousands in prison. In reality, we've set millions free. Like, oh, that's so good. And we did a whole hour on California out of that segment right there, where your state prioritizes the comfort of criminals.
Yeah, that's what the Democrats have long. They've long fallen for the trap that if you're kind to the cruel, then you're cruel to the kind, and that's a axiom. I'm sure some in the audience will remind me of where it's from, but that is what they do. It's always been their policy that they'd rather be compassionate to the society's biggest offenders and at the expense of the most upstanding of our citizens. And that's it. They've been very comfortable with that for a very long time. It's up to us to make the case that that's what's happening. But I got to say, I got to point something out in terms of Bukele, the president of El Salvador, who in some ways acts like a strong man, but a wildly popular one. I've long been a supporter of his, but I have lots of family friends who are in El Salvador, so I get it first. I guess I get it secondhand, and they're all over the moon for the guy. I mean, they love him. And they love
really? Okay. I was wondering where you're going to turn on that. Okay, so everyone likes this guy.
Oh, absolutely. It's not even, its approval rating is like 90%. It's something insane.
Why? Why? What are we? Is it literally just putting criminals in jail? I don't want to say just.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. And one of the reasons, and I asked Frances about it. I said, how is he able to be this successful? And she actually explained how crime in El Salvador is not particularly organized, so you actually can round them all up. There's not really a ton of resistance to it. He's got to go get the guys and bring them to jail. Like, that's really all it is.